None.
Good evening and welcome to the Chatham Airport Commission meeting of Wednesday, February 10th, 2021, beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is a remote participation only meeting. However, it is live broadcast on Channel 18. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Section 30A, number 18, and the Governor's March 23rd, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Chatham Airport Commission is being conducted via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 508-945-4410 with conference ID 135-445-939, followed by the pound sign. Or you can join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. Commissioners, get ready for roll call, please. Commissioner Burke.
Present.
Commissioner Cortese.
Present.
Commissioner Donovan.
Present.
Commissioner Galen.
Present.
Commissioner Owens.
Present.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Present.
And Commissioner Harrison. Commissioners, during the meeting, a couple of things just to remind you, please make sure that your cameras are on at all times. Mute your microphones unless you want to speak, in which case you probably should raise your hand so I can get your attention. And make sure that all comments go through me so we don't have any crosstalk between commissioners. Just ask me and to recognize you, and then we'll go from there. Also, if you have a phone near you, please mute it. And one last final comment. Let's make sure we are all respectful of each other during this meeting and also of the people who are listening in. Okay, the next thing is the minutes. Let me just bring them up here from last time. And in your package this afternoon, you got a revised version of the minutes with the edits already entered. And if anyone has any other amendments to those minutes, please let them be known. And also, someone's rustling some papers, and I don't know if it's any of us, but please do not. As there are no further amendments to the revised draft minutes, I would please take a motion to accept the revised draft minutes.
I move we accept the revised draft minutes as sent in the email today.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you very much. I got a roll call, sorry. Roll call, Commissioner Burke.
Yes.
Commissioner Cortese.
Yes.
Commissioner Donovan.
Yes.
Commissioner Galen.
Yes.
Commissioner Owens.
Yes.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Yes.
And Commissioner Harrison, yes. And by the way, I forgot, I'm present. The next thing I would like the clerk to read before we get into public announcements and agenda item requests. I would like the clerk to read the policy on that, please.
Okay. Public announcements and agenda requests policy. Each airport commission meeting shall begin with public announcements and agenda item requests following the approval of the minutes, if applicable. This portion of the meeting shall not in its entirety exceed 20 minutes, and the limit will be enforced by the chairman of the airport commission. Each recognized speaker during the public announcements and agenda item requests period shall keep his or her remarks to no more than 3 minutes. Generally, remarks that are to be considered appropriate for this portion of the meeting are those that do not encourage debate, but rather are more simple announcements, requests for statements of interest, or agenda items. If a subject, in the opinion of the chairman of the commission or the majority of its members, would be better be addressed as a future agenda item because it warrants public notice and or debate, then the chairman shall restrict the comments and or declare them out of order. Previous actions and or deliberations of the airport commission are not appropriate for discussion during public announcements and agenda item requests.
Okay. The first thing on the list, if anyone's following it, are the ongoing agenda items that we have. There are 5 or 6 bullet points there, 5, I guess. These are open items that we will be tackling at some point going forward. The future agenda requests that came in, these are requests from from several meetings ago, and we're doing our best to catch up. Just so you understand what's there is that anything with a strike through has been dealt with in the past, or the note with the strike through indicates what the status of that particular item is. The ones that are not stricken through are basically items that we will be getting to at some point in the future. I think this is going to give some more transparency to what's happening. Exactly when some of these items will be addressed, I can't say. We'll try to get to them as soon as possible in subsequent meetings. We will also try to, if there is something that we can answer in between meetings, we will do that as well. And maybe that will satisfy the person who has made the request, and we can just strike it through at the next meeting, unless that person wants it to be a public conversation. So, are there any questions about the future agenda topics tracking list by commissioners or anybody? I have a couple of questions. Let's see, I think Selectman Kokolas, I think you were first, or you took your hand down. Peter, do you want to talk? You had your hand up?
Yeah, it should still be up. Mine's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to make a comment. I'm in between meetings, so I can't sit through the whole meeting. And I noticed you have at the end, the environmental assessment, which is an update. I'm not exactly sure what you're going to do, but I just want to give you some thoughts on some considerations you might consider. Given the public input that we've had, the public issues that have come up, there's a number of them, but I think two areas that you could get a lot of discussion on, and will get a lot of tonight. It has to do with, one, the approach, obviously, and then the potential approach, and also the environment and the noise around the airport. I'm getting a lot on that. So what I would have you consider is, I'm not sure what you're doing this afternoon and how much you're going to give, but if you're going to, when you do the environmental assessment, I would imagine the approach is part of that, to get into the details of it, which I think you were talking about once before at an open meeting, and try to discuss in very simple terms, but get at the issues that seem to concern people. From one issue that we're going to have airplanes crashing into a house and the approach is going to come over it, which we all know FAA is not going to allow, to the other extreme that where you say, don't worry about it, trust me. So I think if you could do that and put it into an agenda item where you have just a very limited meeting, and that's just my thoughts on it. When it comes to the noise, what people are saying now around the airport is, hey, it's different than it was 15, 20, 30 years ago. And the environment that we're in is different. That's something you might be able to address at another agenda item to see if there's any way to mitigate that. And I'm not sure locally how much you can do, but I know it's been done at different places. It'd be something to at least reconsider. So with that, I'm only going to be on for a short period of time. So if some of this is already going to be discussed when you get down to the assessment, fine. But I just want to put my 2 cents in for you guys. And anyway, I'll watch the recording.
Okay.
Thank you.
What was that last item you mentioned?
The last one is the complaints that we're getting, about the noise and when airplanes are coming in.
I got that.
In other words, Pilatus weren't around, 10, 15 years ago, and they make more noise. They're a turboprop, but maybe there's a way you can mitigate when they come in, how they come in. And obviously, I believe, the right type of approach is going to make that better anyway. But
yeah, it will.
Yeah. So anyway, that's and if you need anything else, just give me a yell. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Gordon? Carol Gordon? Unmute yourself if you want to speak, please.
Okay, here we go. Chairman Huntley, I was just wondering, what firm has been hired to do the environmental assessment? And you may be bringing that up later on, but I just wanted to pose that question.
Several. You'll find out tonight. You'll find out tonight that the environmental assessment isn't one company. I mean, our engineering firm, Gale, coordinates all the different stakeholders in that. So you'll find out later.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Mr. Buckley?
Yep, thanks. Steve Buckley, just wanted to get a better, I had asked in the previous agenda items, of course, to have a discussion about how the environmental assessment works and the process and so forth. So I guess this is the beginning of it, but since there's nothing in the packet other than the fact that there's going to be a presentation, it's going to be kind of a by the seat of the pants as far as my reaction as an EPA, as an environmental assessment expert, also formerly worked for FAA. So I'm going to have to just wait and see. But I would hope that you'll continue to take questions at the next meeting when it comes, when it occurs to us after having seen whatever it is that's coming up tonight. As far as explaining to people like Mr. Kokolis, for instance, that noise impacts would be considered as part of an environmental assessment. So things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got Mr. Wilson next on my list.
Thank you, Chairman Harrison. I have a future agenda item request. And I'm kind of echoing some of what Selectman Kokolis just said. I think we really need a limited meeting to review the approach because there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about it. But I need to be a little bit more specific, if you'll allow me a minute. Our airport is unique, especially in terms of the frequency of clouds and fog. We have 70 years of outstanding safety history with the current visibility minimum of 600 feet. On page 6-3 of alternative 3 in the master plan update, the new landing approach at our airport that has in fact already been submitted to the FAA as part of the ALP in June of 2020, it states on page 6.3 that the main purposes of this alternative is, and I'm quoting, reducing visibility minimums and enhancing public safety, particularly in inclement weather, close quotes. So we've heard the numerous praises from the pilot community on the safety advantages of a straight-in approach versus a circling approach. That's not the question here. I'm requesting an agenda item which addresses how reducing visibility minimums will improve safety here,
Okay,
particularly from the aspect of people and property on the ground.
okay, thank you. We will do that. Yeah, we're planning on having this all spelled out as we go forward, because I know this is a main concern of people and how these new approaches will work. We don't, at this point, we don't even know if we'll get them.
I have another comment. My concern for safety goes beyond that, because when you look at what your alternative 3 is that's already been submitted, it requires safety waivers or modification to FAA safety standards. And the waiver that you're looking for is that our runway is 200 feet shorter than the FAA minimum for a straight-in approach of 3,200 feet. So when you combine that with the fact that on runway 6, we could end up with a 250-foot visibility minimum, I'm really concerned about safety of people and property on the ground. And that's why I'd like to see an extensive amount of time, a limited meeting that addressed this and how public safety is being enhanced with this approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next, I've got Ms. Lofgren.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. My comment is also about the environmental assessment, and thank you for honoring my previous agenda item request. I see it is crossed out. Given the intensity of public concern and about the EA, I was surprised that the commission meeting package did not contain a print copy of the presentation or any related materials for the public to view. My question is, how is the public supposed to formulate thoughtful and appropriate questions when materials are not provided in an accessible format? And because of the pandemic, the public is challenged by remote participation on all sizes of computer screens, tablets, phones, and sometimes only as a call-in link without visual access, which makes viewing the presentation even more difficult. So my question, Mr. Chairman, is you've promised increased transparency and increased communication with the public. And I would suggest that providing a complete package of what is going to be presented in a meeting would be a great start. Thank you.
We're gonna do the best we can. I can't guarantee that it's going to happen all the time, but you know, getting information out early. There are some constraints on that based on information coming from other sources that might, you know, prevent that from getting in on time. You know, we're doing the best we can is basically what I can say. I hope that satisfies you for now.
Yeah, well, having sat on the commission with you, I know how important it is to be able to digest information so that you don't be redundant or ask something that's answered later. How is Matt's presentation tonight going to be shared with the public?
Basically, it's going to be a PowerPoint and conversation.
And that PowerPoint, will that be available?
Yes, we'll make it available afterwards.
In the package as an addendum or on the website?
I'll try to get it on the website. Yeah, we're going to be posting a lot of things on the website going forward. We're still working on the best way to do that so that things can be found easily. But yes, this will go out. Yep.
Oh, that would be awesome. And I'm happy to hear that you are considering the request to be able to ask questions next time after the presentation.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I know this is an important topic, and I'm not going to give it any kind of, you know, short shrift, believe me.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Ms. Gibbs?
Yes, thank you. This is similar to Paula's request. The agenda says that the final AMPU chapter is compiled, but it is not yet available for posting. And I'm not sure, since it's an agenda item, if you're going to actually discuss the content of it tonight. I would request that once it is posted, that it be placed on a future agenda so that the public can ask questions and have a discussion.
We will probably be posting the final version of the master plan on the website this week.
And so would that be on the agenda at the next meeting for discussion after we have an opportunity to read it?
I can consider it.
Well, I think it would be helpful. I think
agree
there's
with
a
you.
pattern.
I
here
agree
that
with
we
you.
need
It's
to
just
get
what I've got to
placed.
figure out. What I've got to figure out is exactly how we want to do it, because it's a big document, and we can't take one meeting to discuss the entire document. So I've got to figure out exactly how I want to approach that. So that's kind of where we're at with that. But yes, we will be discussing it. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Ms. Wilcox.
Well, there's one other person in front of me, Chairman. Should that go first, or would you like me to make my suggestions?
I'm just taking it from my list here, so go ahead.
This is kind of amending the agenda request that I gave last month. I'd like to request that a public forum, and this might help to solve a lot of the issues we have, Mr. Chairman, which includes at least 2 commissioners, 2 to 3 representatives from the public, and possibly Gale and Associates, be organized prior to submission of the master plan so that the citizens' concerns, if there are any, can be addressed. And again, that would help to simplify if we have a forum that discusses this stuff to get rid of some of the problems so that it doesn't encumber the meetings. So that would be my one agenda item. And the second one is, and it's somewhat been covered, but I'd like to request that future commission meetings, there be more written communication given other than just bullet points on all business discussed at each respective meetings. And especially since subjects like the environmental assessment, the master plan, etc., are such important issues that if we do not have the paperwork available prior and posted prior to a meeting, that the agenda for that meeting be postponed till the following month. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. I just have to turn a page here. All right. Since there are no further public announcements or agenda item requests, we will move on to commissioner reports. Commissioner Burke, Airport Revolving Fund. You got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Good evening. For the period ending January 31st, 2021, the rental lease receipts that we received was $600. On the expense side, the personal services item has $336.49. The aggregate items of purchases of services was $2,035.80, totaling $2,372.29.
Those were the expenditures?
Those were expenditures, yes.
Okay. Against revenue of what? I'm sorry.
$600 from the rental lease receipts.
Okay.
There were a couple of capital outlay operating expense items to Gale was $11.16 and $92.39, and operating supplies of $25.39 for a total of $12,000, excuse me, $894. And all of the hangar leases are up to date as far as the stuff received there.
Okay, good enough. I don't know if we have to make a motion to accept these reports, but I think I will just to do it. Is there a motion, please, to accept the revolving fund report?
Excuse
Oh,
me,
is there-
Huntley,
Is there a question?
I have a question, please.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Chairman, in this report, under the receivables for the hangars, it says account name, and and as I understand it, the name isn't concurrent with when the payment was made. I would like to request that under the name, that the hangar number be reflected as well, so that quarterly billings and payments can be accurately assessed. Again, because I understand that payments were made in July, October, et cetera, but for which hangars and what is not indicated. So I'd like to request that the hangars.
Yeah, I know that the town software cannot do that, which is where that report comes from. But I keep a personal spreadsheet of who's paid and when, and I will make sure that we do that next time.
Or you could forward it to me, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay. Okay, good. All right. Do I hear a motion to accept the revolving fund report?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Roll call, Commissioner Burke,
Yes.
Commissioner Cortese,
Yes.
Commissioner Donovan,
Yes.
Commissioner Galen,
Yes.
Commissioner Owens,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Yes.
and Commissioner Harrison. Yes. I believe it passes unanimously, and we're good to go. Thank you, Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Owens, Fisherman Storage Area, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just 3 brief items on the update of the fisherman's storage area. In speaking with Harbor Master Stuart Smith, I was told that the rents on the storage area plots are up to date. And the next billing cycle, I believe, is going out in May, and I'll have figures on this at the March meeting. Number 2, as a result of part of the environmental assessment, specifically wildlife hazards, and to be following FAA design standards and grant assurances, we are looking into relocating the fisherman's storage area to another part of town. A permanent location has not yet been finalized. And number 3, as part of the airport safety and maintenance program, we have applied for assistance to survey the runway 24 north end property boundary to assist the airport in its vegetation management efforts, ensuring that vegetation removal is conducted on airport property and not on private property. It is recommended that vegetation be cleared to within 10 feet of any fence line or boundary, so there's always a buffer left between the area being used and private property. The survey work should be getting started soon. I think it's still in the application process.
Yes, it is. Right. Okay. Any questions for Commissioner Owens? Okay. Do I have a motion to accept the fisherman storage area report?
Motion to accept?
And we have a second. I think I heard a second there.
Second.
All right. Commissioner Burke,
Yes.
Commissioner Cortese,
Yes.
Commissioner Donovan,
Yes.
Commissioner Galen,
Yes.
Commissioner Owens,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Yes.
and Commissioner Harrison, yes. Okay, thank you, David. And Commissioner Galen, communications.
Okay. We are still in the process of looking for a communications and marketing firm to help with promoting the airport. The firm we had looked at most closely had to drop out due to a conflict of interest. We are revisiting with a firm that we talked to last year. And maybe at the next meeting, we'll have more information and an update on that.
Okay, thank you. Motion to accept the communications report. Anybody?
Accept.
Okay. And I think we had a motion made and a second. Commissioner Burke,
Yes.
Commissioner Cortese,
Yes.
Commissioner Donovan,
Yes.
Commissioner Galen,
Yes.
Commissioner Owens,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrison? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. And operations and maintenance, Commissioner Donovan, you have anything?
Thank you. Just briefly, just been working on getting some more info on the electric vehicle charging stations. Should have some more direction on that, probably the next meeting. So.
Okay, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there are some state grants for that.
There are, yeah. We should be able to apply for some money, so I'll make sure we get that to the commission as well.
Okay, good. Again, just to stay consistent, can I have a motion to accept the operations and maintenance report?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Burke,
Yes.
Commissioner Cortese,
Yes.
Commissioner Donovan,
Yes.
Commissioner Galen,
Yes.
Commissioner Owens,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Yes.
and Commissioner Harrison, yes. Okay, thank you all very much. Moving on to the airport manager's report, Mr. Howard.
Hello, how you doing? Good evening.
Very well.
All right, not too much on the airport manager's report this month. It's been pretty slow with the weather and COVID, I guess. But we have the guard report as usual. It's item 1. If there's any questions on that. Item 2, we continue as the weather permits to work on the airport property. Specifically right now in the northeast area where we're looking at doing that surveying. So we're staying away from those areas until such time as we get that survey work done. But we're working in other areas as we can. Nothing else of significance to report on the manager's report. So, but there any questions on those two, I'm Bill.
Okay. Hearing no questions, do I have a motion to accept the airport manager's report?
Motion to accept?
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, Commissioner Burke,
Yes.
Commissioner Cortese,
Yes.
Commissioner Donovan,
Yes.
Commissioner Galen,
Yes.
Commissioner Owens,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Yes.
and Commissioner Harrison, yes. Thank you all very much, appreciate it. And we'll move right along to the engineer's report. Mr. Karen.
Good evening, members of the commission. Mr. Chairman, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. So real quickly, I know there's a couple items on here before I get into the engineer's report. The first one being the Cape Cod Commission Development of Regional Impact. I just want to say at this point in time, the airport master plan and the current environmental assessment do not trigger the DRI thresholds, and therefore there is no DIR process at this time. However, when the Airport Commission does move forward or plans to move forward with selected projects from its CIP, we will have to review applicability of the projects in relationship to the Cape Cod Commission's jurisdiction and whether or not the projects meet or exceed certain thresholds adopted by the Cape Cod Commission. If there are certain thresholds that are triggered, then the Airport Commission would be required to adhere to the procedures for filing the DRIs. But again, at this time, the CIP projects are conceptual and therefore there is no DIR process currently. I don't know if there's anything else you want to ask me about that or if you'd like me to add anything to that, but as I stated, there's no process at this time because we're not triggering any of those thresholds.
I'm fine with it. Are there any questions from the other commissioners? I see a hand up from someone in the audience. Let me, I don't know who this is. Dave B. I'm sorry, I don't recognize your last name. Go ahead. Oh,
Are you ready?
that Dave B.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
My understanding is when the Cape Cod Commission takes a look at the projects, that they have to look, they're supposed to look at the improvements in their entirety. So when you move forward with this, Mr. Karen or whoever, do you intend to approach the Cape Cod Commission for each individual project, or you're going to present the all the recommended projects in their entirety for the next 20-year period? Because my understanding is that's how it's supposed to be done. They're
Okay.
not supposed to be presented piecemeal.
Mr. Chairman, I guess the only thing I would say at this point in time with respect to that is once the Airport Commission plans on moving forward with specific projects, whether they're the projects in their entirety or piecemeal, we'll make sure that we're coordinating with the Cape Cod Commission to the full extent that's required, and we'll make sure that they're aware of the overall 20-year plan for the Airport Commission, and we'll follow whichever rules and regulations that they require. At this point in time, they're all conceptual projects, so we have not begun that process of better understanding what it is that they require. The regulations may change. So at this point in time, I don't have much more to add other than we'll consider whatever's required at that point in time.
And who will who will reach out to the Cape Cod Commission to request a review?
Mr. Chairman, I suppose if the commission gave Gale marching orders to do that, we would do that on the Airport Commission's behalf.
But I believe it. I mean, I don't think it's your responsibility as a consultant. I think that responsibility lies with the town. So I'm just wondering who is going to do that in the town? Is it going to be the Airport Commission or the town manager?
Mr. Bixby, I have a feeling that because the Airport Commission works on behalf of the sponsor, it would probably be us.
Okay.
If I'm incorrect on that, then I will be corrected, and we'll let you know. But I would suspect that it would be us, and I suspect also that the town manager would be somewhat involved because of the Cape Cod Commission. But I'm guessing on that one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, moving on. The final AMPU chapters compiled.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I think you did touch upon this earlier in the meeting, but Jackie from my office has sent over the PDF versions of all chapters of the master plan to Terry Whalen this afternoon. And my understanding is the goal is to get those up on the website by the end of the week, assuming Terry has the time for that, but I would defer to him on the exact timing. But all chapters are complete and they've been sent over to the town.
Okay, and if people look at the town website now, all the chapters are listed as draft, and that at the end of the week that will change. Mr. Whalen, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm just going to confirm that. Yes, so those will all be up, and they were all downloaded successfully this afternoon, so they'll be loaded up by the end of the week, and clearly noting that they are the February 2021 versions.
Okay. All right, Mr. Karen, environmental assessment.
Okay. Yep, Mr. Chairman, I thank you again.
Everyone's been waiting for.
I appreciate it. Thank you again. And just before I get into the presentation, which I believe Terry is going to help me flip through here, I just want to let you and the rest of the commission know and the members of the public know that we do have Richard Doucette from the FAA. He's the environmental program manager who's overseeing the environmental assessment project for the airport. He is on with us this evening, and I just wanted to make sure that I introduced him.
Welcome, Mr. Doucette. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Okay, and without further ado, I'd like to get into the presentation. And I just want to preface this by saying there have been no decisions made at this point in time. This presentation this evening strictly is to give members of the public and the commission an overview of what the environmental assessment is all about, the different categories that we're looking at within the environmental assessment, which projects are being included as part of the environmental assessment, and hopefully answer some questions that folks may have at the end of this presentation. So with that, Terry, I'd ask you to go to the next slide, please. So first things first, just an overview, broad brush overview here. The FAA Order 1050-1F serves as the Federal Aviation Administration's guidance for compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act. Decisions by FAA officials are subject to NEPA review in accordance with FAA Order 1050-1F and Order 5050-4B, with the exception of some federal actions considered advisory in nature. There are 3 levels of NEPA review, and I'll get into these a little bit more detail on subsequent slides. But the 3 levels are categorically excluded actions, actions normally requiring an environmental assessment, and actions normally requiring an environmental impact statement. And I would like to point out that is the FAA that determines the appropriate level of review. It's not Gale Associates, the consultant, or the Airport Commission that makes that determination, but that is something that is drawn down through the FAA's process. Next slide, please. Okay, so the categorically excluded actions, this refers to a category of actions that do not individually or cumulatively have a significant effect on the human environment and for which neither an EA or an EIS is required. Some example of categorically excluded projects include repaving, lighting upgrades, planning studies like the master plan that was just recently completed. Let's see here, actions that normally requiring an EA. This determines whether the proposed action has the potential to significantly affect the human environment. An EA is a concise public document that briefly provides sufficient evidence and analysis for determining whether to prepare an EIS or whether the FAA would issue a finding of no significant impact. Some examples of projects requiring an EA include extensive airfield changes and new instrument landing systems. Actions normally requiring an EIS. So this is prepared when actions significantly affect the quality of the human environment. An EIS is a detailed written statement when one or more environmental impacts would be significant and mitigation measures cannot reduce the impacts below significant levels. Examples requiring an EIS would be a new airport, a major runway extension. Next slide, please. So the environmental assessment content. So what the Airport Commission and the public can expect in the EA itself that we're preparing on behalf of the Airport Commission that we'll touch upon are the proposed action, which describes the proposed actions. In the case of Chatham, it's the implementation or the construction of future hangars, future vegetation management activities in and around the airport. There's a purpose and need section, which describes the underlying purpose and the need for the federal action. It describes the problem being addressed and what the FAA is trying to achieve with the proposed action. Then there are alternatives, which presents a comparative analysis of the no action alternative against the proposed action and other reasonable alternatives to fulfill the purpose and need for the action. We get into the affected environment, which succinctly describes the environmental conditions of the potentially affected geographic area or areas. This section is no longer than is necessary to understand the impacts of the alternatives. Then there are environmental consequences, which I will discuss in a few minutes here. And this discusses the reasonably foreseeable environmental impacts of the proposed action, the no action, the alternatives, and other alternatives being considered in detail. Next slide, please. So there are 14 environmental impact categories that we explore as part of the environmental assessment. They include air quality, biological resources, climate, coastal resources, Department of Transportation Section 4F, farmlands, hazardous materials, solid waste and pollution prevention, historical, archaeological, architectural and cultural resources, land use, natural resources and energy supplies, noise incompatible land use. I know that came up earlier in this night's meeting. There's socioeconomics, environmental justice, and children's environmental health and safety risks, visual effects, and then water resources, things like wetlands, floodplains, surface waters, groundwater, and wild and scenic rivers. Just an update on where we are in terms of the projects as a result of the Chatham Master Plan that was recently done. So the acquisition of abrogation easements and subsequent tree clearing, this requires an EA. These 2 projects are being included as part of the ongoing EA. The administration building construction, this is considered to be a categorically excluded project. It's on previously disturbed area of airport property. The future hangar construction requires an EA that, again, is being included as part of the ongoing EA. The Jet A fuel facility, that is categorically excluded. Then we have reservation of land for future development in the location of the existing non-directional beacon, and then reservation of land for future non-aeronautical development in the location of the fisherman storage area. These two projects at this point in time are not being included in the EA, but perhaps would need to have a standalone EA at some point in the future when the commission has a better understanding of what sort of development that it would include in the area of the NDB and what sort of development it would include in the former, or what's to be the former fisherman storage area. So just a status on where we are in terms of the ongoing EA. So as I mentioned, as part of the 14 environmental criteria that we're evaluating, one of them, if you recall, was archaeological. So we have an archaeological sub-consultant that we're working with that is doing an intensive locational survey on the airport. They're coordinating with the tribal historic preservation offices of the Wampanoag tribe and the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Locational survey was completed between December 7th and December 23rd, 2020. This included a walkover survey, visual inspection, soil evaluations, and soil core samples. There were over 383 pits that were actually excavated. Fieldwork completion memo report was provided to the Massachusetts Historical Commission for review and comment on January 19th, 2021. To date, I have not received any feedback on that, but we are certainly following up with MHC. There was an aerial photography and mapping component that was included as part of this project. And that essentially was to go and capture all of the Part 77 surfaces and identify where there are obstructions or near obstructions. And this information is being used to determine the areas that require vegetation obstruction removal, both on and off airport property. Next slide, please. Then there's a bike path analysis that we're including as part of this. There was a topographical plan of the bike path from George Ryder Road to Wilford Road that has been completed. The location of the bike path in proximity to the proposed primary surface was uploaded to the FAA's obstruction evaluation and airport airspace analysis portal as part of a 7460-1 evaluation. That was submitted back on December 16th, 2020. That can be somewhat of an extensive process, taking up to 45 days or more. The 7160 process will evaluate the proposed construction, which is the primary surface, or alteration as it relates to air safety and the efficient use of navigable airspace. Once we have that information back, we'll be able to better inform the Airport Commission as to whether or not there's a compatible use with the bike path in the proposed primary surface at the airport, or if there are mitigation measures that need to be taken by the Airport Commission. We also have approach procedures for vertical guidance. I know that this is a burning question with several folks in the audience. What I can say at this point in time is we're currently coordinating with FAA Airports Division and FAA flight procedures regarding the feasibility of implementing an LPV approach at the airport. I can't stress enough that it's not Gale Associates and it's not the Airport Commission that is making the determination as to whether or not there's an equivalent level of safety by implementing an LPV approach at the airport. That is strictly in the hands of the FAA and flight procedures. They're the ones that will take a look at the minimums at the airport. They're the ones that will consider the fact that the airport has a 3,000-foot runway, which is 200 feet short of what FAA AC 150-5300-13A requires. I will say that there is a revision to that design AC coming out, 13B. There is language in there that mentions that runways for instrument approaches are, quote unquote, typically 3,200 feet, but that instrument approaches can be achieved on runways less than 3,200 feet. Next slide, please. Then we have a vegetation management plan component to this. Primarily, we're doing this to conform to the limited project provisions of 310 Code of Massachusetts regulation. This is to allow for vegetation removal located both on and off airport property. What we do as part of the VMP is it sets a list of prioritized yearly operational plans for the first 5 years following the initial VMP activities. It outlines the type of vegetation in proximity to the airport, including on airport property, whether that vegetation is in uplands, whether or not it's in wetlands. It illustrates the methodologies for how that vegetation should be removed in conformance, like I said, with the limited project provisions of 310 CMR 10. Okay, public comments on the draft EA. So circulation of the draft EA for public comment should be considered, but is an option at the discretion of the responsible FAA official. There is no set time limit on public comment periods for EAs. However, they are normally 30 to 45 days. Public meetings or hearings are not required for EAs, but may be considered in some situations. Applicants who prepare an EA may not circulate the draft EA until the FAA has reviewed the document and notified the applicant that the FAA is satisfied with the draft. I only put this in yellow just to highlight that there will be some work, Mr. Chairman, that Gale Associates will be doing in the background with the Commission's assistance and with the FAA. And then at the appropriate time, we'll be presenting all of those materials at a regularly scheduled commission, as we've done with the master plan chapters in the past. The FAA or applicant must publish a notice of the draft EA's availability in local newspapers or other media/internet. If a draft EA is prepared, the FAA or applicant must then revise the draft EA as necessary in response to internal and external comments received. Although the FAA is not required to formally respond to public comments concerning EAs, EAs should reflect the FAA's consideration of such comments. So the next step, as you heard, we're still waiting on the completion of some of these data collection efforts. Once the data collection efforts are complete, an evaluation of the proposed actions will be evaluated against the environmental impact categories, those 14 categories that I previously mentioned. Next slide, please. And just a graphic sort of reiterating this, that there is the data collection process, which we're in right now. Then we're going to move into the evaluation of the proposed actions. We'll prepare a draft environmental assessment, the EA coordination for review with the Commission, the FAA, and Mass DOT. And at that point in time, Mr. Chairman, we'll circle back with the Commission to discuss the next step and follow-up activities regarding the environmental assessment. Next slide, please. And that is all I have. I hope I didn't go through that too quickly, but if I did, and there is an area where you want to go back, I would be happy to answer questions, comments, or any concerns.
Yeah, before I open it up to the public, just a couple of things that I was thinking of as we were going through this. I think there was a bullet point in our agenda about the previous EA. And I think the comment on that, I don't know if it was in your report, but I believe for the 2003 master plan, there was an environmental assessment wasn't required.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Yeah, I apologize if I skipped over that, but yes,
that's right.
Following the master plan in 2003, a lot of those projects did go through that DRI process, but my understanding is there was no project that was proposed that triggered the need for an environmental assessment. Therefore, there was not one done in 2003.
Okay. And during your presentation, there was a page where you mentioned alternatives. Now, I personally know what you were talking about, but I know that the general public, when we think about alternatives, we're thinking about those 3 alternatives for approaches. And that's not what you were referring to in your presentation.
Yeah, what we do is so first things first, you pull together a no action alternative, which looks at what happens if the airport does nothing out there. What's the feasibility? What are the impacts, financially, environmentally, operationally for the airport? Then we include the preferred alternative from the airport master plan that gets included in there. And then we take a look at, are there any other reasonable alternatives that may have been omitted that we should be taking a look at? And in some cases, it could be some of those other options from the from the master plan, or some other options that come up during this process.
Okay, thank you. Before I open the question and answer period up for the public, do the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Karen or Mr. Doucette? And make sure you unmute your mic. Commissioner Wilcox.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for that presentation. I'm not sure what page it was, but considering the Jet A fuel facility, you said that was excluded from the EA? I don't understand.
Correct. There's a categorical exclusion for fuel facilities in 1051F.
meaning that the FAA is not concerned about spill area or any of other environmental concerns may be involved with installing that type of project?
Nope, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that they're not concerned. I would say that there's been a number of facilities across the country that have been implemented that the FAA has vetted, and therefore, based on that past analysis, they've moved that into a categorically excluded action. Richard, do I have that more or less covered correctly?
That term CADX is a strange word. What that is, it's short for fuel farms are a category of projects that are excluded, so CADX, from detailed review. Because we've looked at hundreds of them and we've never seen one that has significant environmental effects, particularly since the installation and use of a fuel farm is so heavily regulated by the EPA and by state agencies that you need to get environmental permits to build it and operate it, and that level of detail is sufficient with regard to spills and that sort of thing.
Thank you. And Commissioner, I have one other question, please.
Sure.
Regarding the 3,000-foot runway versus 3,200, or 3,000 versus the minimum requirement by the FAA on 3,200 feet. Within the master plan, it states this alternative would require the airport sponsor to file a modification to standards with FAA New England region for a deviation from specifications. To me, that's saying that the FAA, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but the FAA's minimum requirements is 3,200 feet. And if we are asking to require a deviation, we're asking the FAA to say that, well, Chatham's got a smaller runway and we can still do that and it's safe. I don't understand that premise. Could you please explain?
Yeah, I would say I think you're perhaps reading off the draft master plan. So the final master plan should clarify that a little bit more, but because there is no modification of standard for that at this point in time. I know that the regulations are ever changing. As I mentioned previously, there is a proposed change to the design AC that is presently underway. And there are LPV approaches across the country that are published on less than 3,200 feet. So it's something that is done. It's done across the country. And all I can really say is that FAA flight procedures, they have their rules and regulations that they follow. There are certain criteria that they look at, and that decision would be borne by FAA flight procedures as to whether or not, again, the Chatham Airport could, with a 3,000-foot runway, get an LPV approach with an equivalent level of safety. That's a decision that FAA flight procedures will be making.
And when will that be done?
Like I said, we're coordinating with them right now. We are working with them, and they're taking a look at some of the operations at the airport and making that determination.
Thank you.
Commissioner Galen.
Matt, thank you for the presentation. I have a question on process, and maybe I misunderstood, but it sounded to me like what happens now is the EA goes to the FAA before it comes to us for review. In the way that it was, you were laying out the different steps. Is that true?
Yeah, so there are certain sections that we will probably pull together, and I'll be coordinating with Richard to make sure that they're in compliance with what the FAA is looking for. I certainly don't want to bring something to the Airport Commission, and get approval and get votes on it, and then turn around and go to the FAA and Mass DOT, only to find out that it's not something that's acceptable to them. So yes, we'll be working with the FAA behind the scenes on this.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Cortese.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Karen, just have a quick question for you regarding the 3,200 versus 3,000. Do we have a list of the amount of airports across the country that have LPVs that are under 3,000 feet or under 3,200?
Yeah, I was actually provided a list by Rene Haas when he was a commissioner on the Chatham Airport Commission. He took on the lead of pulling some of those down. So I do have those, just not with me this evening. Commissioner Cortese, but I could certainly float that over to you.
That'd be great. I mean, I know of one of them that we've flown into, which is Block Island. It's a 2,500 foot strip with an LPV. Thank you.
Yep,
no problem.
Mr. Karen, if you could funnel that through me, I can get it out to the various commissioners.
Yep, just made a note of that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners before I open it to the public?
What?
Go ahead. You have another
I
question?
just want to say I appreciate Mr. Cortese's observation that Block Island is one of them, but Block Island is completely surrounded by water versus Chatham certainly isn't. And that needs to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Do you have a response, Mr. Chairman Cortese? I mean, Commissioner Cortese?
Yeah, Commissioner Wilcox, yes. In fact, if you look at it, Chatham is surrounded by water as well. As soon as you take off on runway 24, you've got a short bit of land in the over water. It's probably about the same as Block Island. And then the approach in on 24 is the same way as an approach in on 6. We have Pleasant Bay on one side, and we have the Sound on the other.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open this now to the public. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll take you in order. Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Matt, for putting that together. I look forward to being able to read it at a slower pace. I have some questions. I hope they don't appear too random. One was about the Jet A being excluded. Ms. Wilcox mentioned the other installations. Do any of these installations sit on a single source aquifer like Cape Cod? And does that bear, or should that bear, looking at rather than being categorically excluded?
There is the EPA has a sole source aquifer program that we need to coordinate every project with them. And Matt and I will do that for this project to make sure that they're aware and can offer any input on how the fuel farm might be constructed to protect the sole source aquifer, because we're certainly aware that that's an important issue.
Second question, the vegetation plan, if that is ongoing, does that become part of the CIP? Does that become part of the budget? Will it be paid for by the revolving fund or grants or town meeting requests?
The vegetation management plan is actually being funded by the FAA at 100% as part of the fiscal year 2020 project. It's just a plan that illustrates the areas of where obstructions are, wetlands are. It lays out methodologies for certain cuttings in certain areas. It's not actually a cutting project. It's just a plan for future cutting.
So how is this, does this measure at all into the wildlife and vegetation plan that was adopted, that you presented at a meeting?
I'm sorry, I missed your question. Could you state that again?
Is this an outgrowth of the wildlife and wildlife plan, or is it something?
This is entirely separate from the wildlife hazard management plan.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, under categories, the first one is climate, which hasn't been mentioned, and I'm wondering how the airport's master plan kind of aligns with Chatham's a green community. You have the net zero for the state. You have the 5 Cs for climate change. You have 350.org. Everyone is trying to mitigate carbon emissions. As part of the EA, will that be addressed, that how the airport is going to attempt to mitigate carbon emissions to go along with town and regional plans?
All I'll say at this point in time, as we get into the development of the EA and addressing those categories, we'll take a look at the significant thresholds that the FAA outlines, and if appropriate, we'll make sure we're including information on that in the EA.
Does the FAA, well, thank you. Just a couple more. One is previous EAs. I know in reading the 2 former master plans, 73, I think it is, and the one in the 80s, both have EAs that include noise assessment. So do they bear at all anything on what's happening now?
Certainly, we'll take a look at those previous EAs, and once again, we'll take a look at the significant thresholds within the FAA's documentation and make sure that we're addressing that accordingly.
Okay, and I just have one last question, if I may, and that is who decides what kind of an EA or an EIS that you get? I'm wondering how the FAA compares to the Army Corps of Engineers that issued finding of no impact for a 700-acre machine gun facility down at Joint Base Cape Cod. They found that with clearing the vegetation, clearing the trees, adding in a machine gun range, that there would be no environmental impact. Town is taking exception to that finding. Is the FAA a little bit more, I would say, receptive to people who live here in Chatham? Because I know in the master plan, there was or even in the EA application, your goal is to find no impact.
Each federal agency has its own internal guidance as to how we do NEPA, and I can't really speak for any agency other than the FAA. I've certainly looked at other agencies' documents and have been surprised sometimes by the scope of projects that they can CADX, for instance. Whereas the type of projects I've seen that other agencies CADX, we would do an EA on. I can tell you we do very few EISs. I've been with the FAA for 20 years and I've worked on 3 EISs, so it's relatively uncommon. And it's based on the potential for significant environmental impacts. And if they are significant enough, then we do an EIS. A project of this scope in Chatham would never get to an EIS.
Okay, thank you. Before I move on to Mr. Bixby, I think someone on the phone was trying to get my attention, and if it's hard for me to tell, but if there is someone out there, just speak up. Okay, I guess not. All right, Mr. Bixby, you're on.
Unmuted. Okay, Mr. Karen, could you explain again what kind of review the FAA is going to do with the bike path? Is that going to be an obstruction review?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So the bike path, as you know, or you may or may not know, it snakes around the airport property. Right now, it's not within the airport's existing primary surface. With the proposed LPV approach, the Part 77 regulations, the primary surface is widened. And so the bike path sits below that surface. And so we've uploaded this information into that 7461 portal I was mentioning, so it can be evaluated by the FAA to see if there's any mitigation measures that are required for the widening of that primary surface, or if there's, if it can exist cohesively with the airport.
So explain what the implications of that. Let's say that they say it can't. What does that mean? Does that mean that they then can't have their, the LPV or whatever it is that they're looking at, or does it mean the bike path has to be moved or rerouted?
At this point,
typically would mean the bike path might have to nudge a little bit out of the way. That's what I would anticipate.
And the location of the bike path and the existence of the bike path and the surrounding vegetation and the vernal pond went through a pretty extensive review with the Cape Cod Commission, and there were conditions set by the Cape Cod Commission that related to the bike path and also the vegetation down around that area. How have you guys looked at the conditions set by the Cape Cod Commission for the red vegetative vegetative management in that area and also for the existence of the bike path? Or
I
and
was,
if you haven't,
I was part of the review of when the bike path went and the other projects at the airport went to the Cape Cod Commission 10 or 15 years ago. I don't recall exactly. So we'll look back at those conditions and make sure that we certainly don't violate any of that and contact the Cape Cod Commission if we need to.
okay.
All right. Mr. Buckley.
Okay, thank you. It would have been nice to see the presentation beforehand because some of the statements are only partially true. They leave out some things. And so they're not quite correct and people might be
specific?
misled. I'm getting to that. Thank you. An environmental, the environment, and they did put it there, but I was watching it on television and now I'm looking at the computer. But anyway, very fuzzy resolution on, so you can't hardly read it, but I knew what they were trying to get at, which was that the environment that's affected, the affected environment is everything. And I think I'd ask, once I'm done, I would ask Mr. Doucette to confirm that in bureaucratic legal terms, that affected environment means physical environment, natural environment, social environment, historical environment, everything affecting the human environment. So whether or not a larger or safer airport affects the character of Chatham. Yep, that too. Everything, anything you could think of, any effect at all. Do not be fooled. It's unfortunate misnomer to call, because most people, when they think of environmental, they think, oh, it's just a natural environment. Nope, everything. So, and I know that because I worked reviewing these documents at 5 federal agencies at the headquarters level, including the FAA. So I know what I'm talking about. And we're talking about experts, about disinformation. If somebody else knows something, I'd be glad for them to chime in, but I think I know something about this. And I want to make sure that people understand what an environmental assessment is. The other part is that environmental assessment is not a mini impact statement. That was not made clear. The purpose, an environmental impact statement is a detailed statement, quote unquote, detailed statement of the environmental effect. An environmental assessment is not supposed to be a detailed statement, because if it was, it would be an environmental impact statement. It's supposed to be a screening document so that, and a concise one, that's the key word, concise, as it's defined under the federal regulations, concise, just large enough to figure out whether or not an impact statement, a detailed statement, is required. So that's the thing, and significant being the key word. Is this significant to do? Is this big enough, important enough? Will it have enough effect to actually require looking at this in detail? So if we do a $350,000 environmental review and it's detailed, then it is in effect an impact statement, whether that's the name on the front or not. It is legally meets the need as an environmental, and if it's labeled something differently, then that's intentionally misleading. So if it's a detailed statement that we get, it's an impact statement. And so the thing is, I know that having worked there, that federal agencies try like hell to not do an impact statement because it requires more public comment, more scrutiny, and so forth. And so it slows down the process. And that's what they try like hell. They try to shoehorn a lot of major projects, like a machine gun range, like the new bridges over the canal, and say, oh, there's no significant impact here.
Mr. Buckley, we're getting close to time.
Okay, fine. So there you go. So once I am able to review this in detail, there'll be more questions and clarification that I'll be able to provide next time. But I want to make people understand that this is not a mini EI environmental impact statement. It's only supposed to be a screening document to kick it up to the next one. That's the key question, significant or not. So thank you.
Mr. Karen or Mr. Doucette, do you have a comment?
The only thing I would to that is I would agree with most of what Mr. Buckley said, other than the FAA does not consider EAs to be screening documents. One of the roles of an EA is to determine if you should get to an EIS. That is true. But I've had EAs that are 10 pages and take very little time to do, and I've had them that are over 1,000 pages and take 5 years to do and cost $1 million or $2 million. So they do come in, there's quite a range of detail, and it's all based on the scope of the project and the potential impacts and the level of controversy.
Yeah, thank you. Mrs. Gibbs, you're on.
Yes, thank you. The planning board is currently drafting a zoning bylaw change for the West Chatham corridor with the Cape Cod Commission, which is going to result in increased residential density within the runway protection zone. I'm not sure how this can occur, and I was wondering what the safeguards and processes are in place to make sure that they are following the restrictions placed on a town in the runway protection zone. Is there any coordination between the Airport Commission, the Planning Board, the ZBA, and the FAA for any bylaws that could impact negatively the RPZ?
Who are you addressing?
Whoever could answer it, because I don't know. Maybe the FAA can.
I can give you a brief answer. I believe when Mr. Donovan was the chairman of the commission, there was a meeting with the zoning board and the planning board to notify them of the master plan update. And so I do know that the zoning board and the planning board are aware of what we're doing and what we're planning. Mr. Donovan, can you comment on that, please?
I'm sorry, I think you have the reverse situation. I'm wondering if the town and the planning board should notify you guys that they have this bylaw that they're considering where they actually have increasing density within the RPZ. My concern is not you approaching them, but should they be approaching you folks to say, you know, we're planning on building apartment buildings within the RPZ, which I don't think they should be doing.
I can't answer that. I see Mr. Whalen's hand up, so maybe let me defer to him, please. He might have an answer for that. Mr. Whalen.
Yeah, good evening. Terry Whalen. Yeah, just to not to steal Peter's thunder, but going back when Commissioner Donovan was the chair, we did have some outreach. Peter and I did meet with the chair of the planning board and community development staff, going over items related to the RPZ. So at the planning staff level, the planning chair level, they're aware of that. So we had some, I'll call it initial dialogue on that. So there's a dialogue that's been started. And obviously, if any proposals, because I haven't seen any concrete proposals, but anything that, or quite frankly, any proposal for a zone change in the RPZ, internally we'll make sure that gets forwarded to the commission for their information for that direction. And again, the commission has already reached out a little bit, to the staff and the chair of the planning board about the RPZ.
If I could just say this, the planning board made a presentation, I believe on Tuesday, that showed increased density within the RPZ, and I brought it up to them and said, you can't have increased density within an RPZ. It's very clearly against FAA regulations in terms of any public assembly type structures going up. So I guess my concern is, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? Where are the protocols and the safeguards to make sure it doesn't slip through the cracks, that the ZBA does go ahead and do that without the approval of the FAA, because it's clearly a violation, and they didn't really have an answer. And they want to take this to town meeting in May, so it is kind of time sensitive. that they should not be making, in my view, changes where they are promoting increased density within the current RPZ, let alone if it should be expanded at some point in the future. So would the FAA want to see that or say, no, you can't do that? It shouldn't be in the bylaw.
The FAA has no authority whatsoever to restrict what happens on property outside of airport boundaries. We advise against certainly increased residential density or any congregation of people in the RPZ, but we have no authority whatsoever. What we would do is urge the airport to oppose that kind of zoning change, but it's up to the local community what they do with their zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good point, and I think we should probably, make them aware of this conversation. And I thank you, Mrs. Gibbs, for bringing that up the other night, because I hadn't been approached, and I can't act on something that I don't know. So that's good. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question to Mr. Doucette. Did I hear you correctly when you said earlier that an EIS is out of the question in terms of this master plan?
For the projects that we're looking at right now, they're of such a scale that I do not anticipate an EIS. That would be very, very unusual for a project of this scale.
And so when you say the projects that we're looking at now, does that include the proposed LPV approach?
Yes. It includes the tree clearing that's there to facilitate the LPV approach.
Okay. And in terms, one of the things the FAA references a lot is how each airport is unique. And for example, they never define congested area because, quote, each airport is unique. What do you see as the unique features of Chatham and their possible effects in an environmental assessment and in reference to this LPV approach?
I don't have the LPV approach particularly in mind when I'd make that determination. If we're going to decide to do an ES, we would look at multiple resource categories. And Mr. Buckley was correct. It could be social or environmental or historical or whatever. Multiple categories that could be significantly affected. So we'd have to see that kind of potential for effect from tree clearing and hangars and other development that's relatively small in the grand scheme of things.
Okay. How does the preferred alternative affect the environmental assessment? The preferred alternative in terms of the LPV approach?
The preferred alternative for whatever components of the A are, hangars, administration building, fuel farm, whatever you're looking at. The potential impacts of the preferred alternative are what we're looking at. It's what we're analyzing. And we compare that to the no action alternative.
All right. So getting back to a couple of things that were mentioned earlier, this LPV approach, this is for the commission in general or Mr. Karen or whoever. I took a quick look at Block Island, and while it does have a 25-foot runway, it has considerable green areas at both ends of their runway. And if you come in from the further ocean side, you're going over mostly wooded area. But when you submitted your preferred alternative, you mentioned in Chapter 6 that runway 6 could have as low as 250 feet as the minimum altitude. And currently, you're asking the FAA to look at a 20-to-1 approach for an LPV versus the 30-to-1 that I believe is the standard. My question is, couldn't this commission have submitted this LPV approach with a request to maintain the 600-foot minimum visibility level? And I guess, why wouldn't you do that? Why is it important to reduce the visibility level, particularly in inclement weather, in terms of the number of homes between Pleasant Bay and the end of the runway? I know pilots want to come in on a straight approach. That's not my question. My question is, more planes, from my point of view, are going to land here with a 250-foot visibility level than a 600-foot visibility level. And that creates risk to people and property on the ground. Can I get some feedback on why we didn't request maintaining the 600 feet?
Mr. Wilson, I don't think we're there yet in our deliberations with regard to the types of approaches that are coming in. No decision's been made.
But the document that you submitted said 250 feet on runway 6.
Remember, it's a planning document.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just jump in too, I believe, I don't have chapter 6 in front of me, but I believe what we are stating is that approaches can get as low as 250 feet, not that the Airport Commission is seeking to get as low as 250 feet. All we were doing is citing the design AC, and it can be, I believe it can be as low as 250 feet. And again, that's not what was requested. And the FAA flight procedures will certainly take into consideration terrain and the area and the community before implementing an approach and issuing minimums as low as 250 feet. At this point in time, we have no idea if they would even be lower than the current 600 feet minimums that the airport has to date.
Right, but you did request them to look at a 20-to-1 approach. Could you not have requested them to look at maintaining the 600-foot approach, ceiling height? I'm sorry.
I suppose perhaps we could have said that, yes, or asked for that.
I would expect that your public reaction, if you had done that, would be considerably more favorable than the path you're going down currently. A few more questions. I know I've taken some time here.
You've taken up a lot of time here. I'm trying to keep it to 3 minutes.
I understand. I didn't see too many other hands raised.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 right now.
All right. Is there an appeal process if the commission or the town doesn't agree with the environmental assessment?
Explain more what you mean by that.
Well, the presentation went through very quickly, but it said something like the public can make comments on this and it can get sent back to the FAA. If the FAA fails to react to some of the public comments, is there any kind of appeal process?
Any decision the FAA makes can be appealed by law following the Administrative Procedures Act. So you can always file a complaint in court once we've made a decision.
Okay. And on the fuel farm, the size of the spill containment, is that going to have to double if we put another 10,000 gallon tank in there over what it is today?
I have no idea the answer to that. That'd be a question probably for DEP and the state and local entities that restrict fuel farms and how they're constructed.
All right. And in terms of next steps, that slide that Mr. Karen put up, is it Gale Associates that's writing the environmental assessment based on the data they've got from these subcontractors that they've hired to give them the data needed? And then you submit it to the FAA? Is that how this works?
Gale Associates is the prime consultant. They're working under a contract to the Airport Commission, and they're working under the guidance of the Airport Commission and me.
So, but who's writing the environmental assessment? Are you writing it, Mr. Doucette, or is Gale Associates writing it?
I think the primary author is probably Matt Karen.
Okay. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Mr. Bixby, remember, 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, hi. I guess I want to, maybe it's Mr. Doucette. I believe you said that the level of controversy was a factor in deciding whether to go from an EA to an EIS. Given that the master plan proposed or is proposing anywhere between 20 and 50 navigational easements that created a firestorm of controversy in Chatham, wouldn't that kind of controversy indicate the need for a full EIS?
I think the short answer is no.
That's question one, and I'll ask my other question, and you can answer, and I won't chew up my 3 minutes. on the issue of the increased density, it's not entirely true that the FAA has no role or authority in the matter of, it's true that the FAA can't control the zoning, the town zoning. However, the town has a contract with the FAA where it has committed to control, to use zoning to restrict or avoid the zoning of residential properties within the area surrounding the airport. The town has a grant assurance obligation to not increase the density beyond, obviously, what's beyond what's already there. The FAA has an obligation to withhold airport funds for future airport funds for improvements if the town goes ahead with this. So it's not an insignificant. The FAA is not without a role here. So I make those 2 points, and you can comment on it.
I would agree the FAA has a role. We would expect the Airport Commission, who are the ones who hold those grant assurances, to advocate within the community to not increase the density within the RPZ. You just said it's the Airport Commission that has the responsibility in Chatham for enforcing grant assurances? It's whoever the sponsor is. I don't know in this case if it's the Airport Commission or the municipality.
Could you, are you with the FAA?
Yes.
Could you find out who exactly the sponsor is in Chatham? Because there's just been a roundabout discussion on this going on years. Is it the town or is it the Airport Commission?
Mr. Bixby, I can answer that. And it was answered on December 1st by town council. And he made a statement. I believe, I don't know if it's up on the website yet. I've submitted it for posting on the website.
I've read them.
And well, that's the answer. The town is a sponsor.
All right, I'll table that question. Go back, Mr. Doucette, answer the other 2 questions then. The issue of the navigation easements. The issue of the navigation easements and
you don't need to restate it. I heard it. That level of controversy is not sufficient for this EA to become an EIS. The short answer is no.
Okay.
Wow.
Mr. Cortese, Commissioner Cortese, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Huntley. Just wanted to bring up a couple facts on approaches and regarding the comments on Block Island. If you look at the approach to Block Island and Runway 28, it actually goes over the town of Block Island, where ours does not. And then just a couple of comments on approaches. There's a difference between visibility and height, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page with that. Visibility is a horizontal visibility. Height is a DA or an MDA or a DH or a MDH, depending on how you want, depending on what you're referring to. And actually, the DA in Chatham is 536, so it's 536 on both approaches. The DH is, well, actually, it's not. It's an MDA is 600. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Mr. Quinn. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman Harrison. Hey, I just wanted to piggyback on what Mike Cortese just said with the Airport Commission. I totally agree with what he's saying, and I think the general public, without getting too down in the weeds on approach construction and that kind of stuff, every airplane that comes into Chatham Airport is at 250 feet at some time. Having a lower minimums don't make any difference at all as to how low the aircraft come in over the house. There's a certain degree of glide path, and it's usually around 3 degrees, 2.98, 3.1, depending on the actual vegetation and the land around the area. The bottom line is every airplane has to hit 0 at some point or we'd never land. Now, putting that LPV approach into the Chatham Airport doesn't change how high the airplanes come over anybody's house or anybody's trees. They come in almost the same as most airplanes do right now. Now, some would complain they're flying right over my house, but if they're on an instrument approach, they don't fly over the treetops. The FAA would never allow that. So I just want to make that distinction that every airplane coming into Chatham is at 250 feet at some point. And Mike is right on. The landing, you would never shoot an approach into Chatham if the visibility was below the minimums. You'd get down there and you'd never see the runway anyway. So it's not like you're ducking down below the clouds and flying over people's chimneys and their houses to get into the airport. So I just wanted to clarify that and hope I didn't take up too much time. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Let's see, Mr. Haas.
Thank you, Chairman Harrison. Basically, I just wanted to very briefly chime in. Dana Quinn and Mike Cortese really explained most of what I wanted to say already. Just that, the misconception or, statements that were made regarding visibility requirements versus height over airport. As Mr. Quinn said, every airplane is going to make it, from 500, 600 feet to 300 to 200 to 100 down into landing. And it's the visibility requirements are not 250 or 600 feet. The visibility requirements based on, FAA documents, as to what could be achieved at Chatham is not going to be less than 1 mile. And a mile is out, beyond, the homes that, people are concerned about, both on Great Hill on the one side, as well as in the West Chatham neighborhoods on the other side. So aircraft have to see the airport a mile away, and at that time they have to see the airport and the lights that guide them in at a certain height. These are called PAPI lights. They're white and red lights that guide aircraft vertically when they're within that 1 mile. Now certain airports like Barnstable might be able to get have approaches that have half mile visibility requirements, but there are, in those cases, indeed, the RPZ has to be much larger, which is, errors or misconceptions that have been spread about this large RPZ. And certainly that's, not in the cards in anything that's being planned at Chatham, to my knowledge. So just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilson, you're up again, but I'm just going to restrict you, since you had such a long time last time, to one question.
Thank you. I guess my question is that based on the previous comments, so when a plane is approaching Chatham and it's a mile away, I believe today it's at a height of 600 feet in order to make visual contact with the runway. And my concern is not that the planes won't be eventually landing at the airport. I mean, we all know they're going to come down over the roofs of homes, and with a new approach, it's going to be, they still have to hit the ground. My concern is that by lowering the visibility minimum, you increase the frequency of planes that will be landing during inclement weather. That's the concern. That's the concern of all the residents who live in the approach zones on either end of the airport, that you're going to increase the frequency, okay? Yes, the planes are going to hit the ground, hopefully on the runway. But we're worried about the frequency of it, because in 70 years here, we've had very few accidents. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Wilson, if I may comment, I think Mr. Haas just said that the visibility minimums are going to be no less than a mile.
A mile away, but how high?
At a mile away, it depends on the approach.
Altitude? What's your decision altitude?
I think that was also mentioned earlier. I think it's 600 feet.
Right, that's what it is today. Is that what it's going to be under an LPV approach?
Unmute, Matt.
Mr. Chairman, at this point in time, we don't have the answer to that. That's
Okay.
FAA flight procedures would make that as part of their determination on publishing an LPV approach.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Lofgren, again, you had a long time last time. One question, please.
Oh, I don't have a question. I just have a recommendation to go along with Elaine Gibbs' comment about building within an RPZ. This is with regards to building within the approach, which is how we got into this pickle right now. I would point you to previous master plans that are on the website that speak about land use compatibility. And actually, the Airport Commission has recommended to the town not to build in certain places because it would be an issue. So if you haven't read those documents before, I recommend that you read the history of that. Because I worry about if the planning board does go along, they might be in the same situation homeowners are now, in which without disclosure, residents there or even businesses might not be aware of just the intensity of traffic there. So not a question, just a comment.
Thank you. Mr. Buckley, again, one comment or one question?
Okay, comment. Thank you. I forgot to point out that there's a Supreme Court case against segmenting projects into little pieces, like was done on one of the PowerPoint presentation, saying, well, fuel farm is this, and this is categorically excluded. So I would assume that Mr. Doucette, maybe not tonight, but some point, Gale Associates could come back and tell us why making this master plan environmental assessment, cutting it into little pieces and judging each one separately is not illegal.
Okay, thank you. We'll take it under advisement. Commissioner Cortese.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Huntley, Chairman Harrison. Just real quick on that, on the visibility versus MDA versus MDH. Again, just wanted to make sure I was clear and that we're all on the same page again. Current visibility is a mile. I believe Mr. Haas had mentioned that. And the MDA for the current approach is 600. The MDH, which is the height over the airport, is 536. That's a big distinction. And as far as the number of traffic or the amount of traffic coming in, there's a small percentage, it's a very small percentage of pilots that will actually be able to utilize these approaches versus the traffic, in my opinion, will not change at all with these new approaches. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got two more hands up and we're going to cut it at that point. So there'll be no more questions after the second speaker. Mr. Quinn.
Thanks, Chairman Harrison. I just wanted to kind of help out some of the misconception here that Mr. Wilson had about 300 feet and 600 feet and 250 feet. Every pilot in the world seeks to do what they call in the piloting profession a 3-to-1 rule. At a mile out, you should be at 300 feet. At 2 miles out, you should be at 600 feet. At 3 miles out, you should be at 900 feet. So it's multiples of 300 feet. That's the 300-to-1 rule. Now, how does that get into the discussion that we had tonight? If you're at 600 feet at a mile, there's not an airplane in the world or a pilot in the world that would want to attempt that. You'd be diving at the ground, you'd be too high, and you'd never land out of it. You'd need a 10,000-foot runway to do that. Nobody's going to be at 600 feet a mile out from Chatham Airport on an instrument approach, or no matter what the visibility is, if it was a clear day, you'd have to be a pretty good pilot to get that airplane on the ground. So I just wanted to mention that. And most of the glide paths for LPVs, ILS approaches, any kind of precision instrument approach will put you at about 300 feet a mile out from the runway. That's how they're designed. And I don't claim to be an FAA designer of approaches, but every airport I've been to in the world comes in at about a 3-degree glide path, and that's 300 feet at 1 mile. So I hope that clears it up. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Last question, Mrs. Wilcox.
It's Ms. Wilcox, just for the
Sorry.
record. This whole thing is fairly controversial, and I guess the input that I have is, and again, it's reiterated by Mr. Wilson. If it's working correctly, why fix it? So you can talk about 600, 200, whatever. And again, I am going to misrepresent this, but it's a good weather versus bad weather. I would hope that the FAA, and I'm directing this to Mr. Doucette, would consider maintaining the same standard that Chatham currently has. Because again, I live near the airport, and I'm concerned about pilots trying to land in less than good conditions. And if that means 600 feet or whatever terminology, that's what I'd like to request. Thank you.
Okay, we've come to our end of our comment period, and I thank everyone for your comments. I think it's been very helpful. I think we have a better idea of what the environmental assessment will be going forward. I'd like to thank Mr. Doucette for his part in this evening's discussion, and also Matt, thank you for putting the presentation together and inviting Mr. Doucette. To wrap up the evening, I want to know if the commissioners have anything a closing statement they'd like to make. You're not obligated, but if you'd
Excuse
like,
me,
I'll go through and poll the group. And then you can say what you need to say, if anything.
Huntley, excuse me. I think we need to approve the engineer's report before we go forward.
Thank you very much. It's good to have a clerk that keeps up with me. Someone make a motion, please, to approve the engineer's report.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Now we have a second. I think that was Mr. Cortese. Roll call, Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Cortese,
Yes.
Mr. Donovan,
Yes.
Mr. Galen,
Yes.
Mr. Owens,
Yes.
Ms. Wilcox,
Yes.
and Mr. Harrison, yes. Thank you very
Excuse
much.
me, who made the motion? I missed the voice.
I believe, Dave, was it you?
Ted.
Ted,
Mr. Burke, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm gonna poll the commissioners again. If you have a closing statement, if you don't, just say no closing statement, and we'll move to the next one. Commissioner Burke.
I have no closing statement to make at this time.
Thank you. Mr. All of a sudden, I had a flash to the Capitol. Mr. Cortese.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say regarding the approaches that these are simply safer approaches. We don't need to get into the details, and we'll get that. We'll get all those details when the FAA presents it to us, and then we'll make the best decision at that point.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Donovan?
No statement for me. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Galen?
Same, nothing tonight.
Okay, Mr. Owens?
Yes, if we can back up a little bit to the airport manager's report, unless I missed it on the old business reminders. Did Tim mention anything about the crack ceiling for the main ramp?
No, that just keeps going on until we can get the state to free up time to do it.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
it just stays there.
Yep.
And
Okay,
then-
and I'd just like to, if I may, just thank Mr. Karen again and Gale Associates for doing such a great job. You know, in their efforts in making the airport a better place.
And safer. Okay, Ms. Wilcox, final statement?
None.
None. And Mr. Harrison, the only thing I would like to say that here's my takeaway for this evening. We have a good progress going forward. We have good progress going forward with the environmental assessment. And I think we have at least I have my marching orders to get in touch with the zoning board and the planning board, which I will do through Mr. Whalen, and talk about the potential zoning changes that seem to be in the works. But that would be my takeaway, my major takeaway from this evening. And I want to thank, I don't know if Mr. Whalen's still online, but thank you very much. And Mr. Van Bork at Channel 18, thank you very much. And Mr. Rowe from the Chatham IT department, thank you very much. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
Before that, one quick thank you to Mr. Doucette for joining us.
Yes.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Doucette.
Richard, hopefully we'll see you again sometime.
Sure, I'm sure you will.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Well, just one.
Okay.
One person.
So moved.
So moved. Okay, and a second?
I do.
Okay, seconded by Ms. Wilcox. Roll call, Mr. Burke.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Cortese.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mr. Galen.
Yes.
Mr. Owens.
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox. Ms. Wilcox.
That too. Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Harrison, yes. Okay, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much for your participation. We will see you in a month.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.